verse 8. Okay, so even before he gets the other counsel, he rejects the older. Now that leads me to some ideas in my head that says he didn't like what they said. He already had an inclination of what he wanted to do and how he wanted to answer this request, because he just outright rejected their advice when they said to do what was the word? Speak good words to them. In other words, be kind to them, maybe lessen their burden, all of that. Speak good words to them and they'll serve you, right? But no, he doesn't want to do that. And he just rejects it. Then he does what? Okay, he seeks more advice. And this time he seeks advice from the younger men. Now, is that necessarily a bad thing? No. Seeking advice from people that you know and people that you grew up with, that's not necessarily bad, okay? Now, the advice that they give him is not great advice, right? And basically their advice is, don't just not ease up on their burdens, put your thumb down and make it harder, okay? Be the slave driver type of thing. So ultimately he does that, and then we have the result. We have the rebellion of Jeroboam, right? And the kingdom being divided. So what's the moral of the story here in 1 Kings chapter 12?
Experience is
be careful who you want to influence.
In this particular case, the experience trumps inexperience, right? That's one really good point here, the value of wisdom that's often gained through experience. But I think ultimately, be careful who you listen to, right? Advice and who you take advice from is really important. Now, the thing about Rehoboam, and this goes back to an earlier point I made, is I think he already had in mind a direction that he wanted to go. And sometimes we have that, right? We think we ought to go this way. That's good, I guess. We have opinions, right? We think we ought to go that way. But what do we need? Does that mean it's the right decision? Not necessarily, right? Well, how do we get confirmation? We need guidance. Because other people may see things better than we do and more clearly. We think we ought to go this way. Okay. I hope if we weighed that out, that's good. But actually having people around us that have wisdom, that have experience, can help us to not make a really bad decision. Right? So he couldn't see the end of it, right? Okay. So the people that we surround ourselves with can help us make better decisions. They can help us to avoid really bad decisions too, right? So it's important, right? And that's why I wanted to turn to 1 Kings chapter 12. This idea of who we surround ourselves with, who we listen to, is a really important decision. Okay?
one thing that stands out to me is that I don't see anywhere where it says that Rehoboam went to the Lord.
Yeah, that's a really good point as well. Whereas we also see that back in the book of Joshua too, right? When they went to attack the city of Ai and did not ask counsel of the Lord, and also with the Gibeonites as well. They didn't ask counsel of the Lord. So yes, we can make that point as well. Okay? All right, let's get into the lesson. So the main point of this lesson is to make no friendships with the wicked. So it's primarily focused on the negative side of things. Be careful who you spend time with. Be careful of your friends. Make sure that you're not in association with those who would lead you down the path of wickedness, right? That's the main point out of this entire lesson. Before we really get into the heart of the lesson, I want to look at a few Proverbs. Proverbs chapter 1 and verse 10. And this is really just the start of a section. It's probably from verse 10 down to verse 19. But we're just going to look at verse 10 here when the father is talking to the son and tells the son, "My son, If sinners entice you, do not consent. Sounds really, really simple, right? My son, if sinners entice you, do not consent. What does the word entice mean? Persuade? What's allure? Tempt? I think tempt is a really good word there. When something is enticing, when you're trying to eat well, and your wife makes you a chess pie, guess what? That chess pie is enticing, right? Okay. We know what enticing means. It's something that's attractive to us. It's something that tempts us. So what do we learn about these associations here? If sinners entice you, what is that telling us? One, they're going to.
Don't go along with it.
The ultimate point is don't go along with it. It's tempting. It's attractive. Sin is enticing. Association with sinners is enticing. To go along with people doing things that they shouldn't do is enticing. It's tempting. If it wasn't tempting, if it wasn't enticing, then what? You wouldn't want to. We wouldn't have to have, well, we wouldn't have to have a lot of things. We wouldn't have to have a lot of this, right? If it wasn't enticing. So this, while it's a really simple admonition, this admonition sets up everything else. If sinners entice you, do not consent. Hold your ground. Don't associate. Don't fall victim to this temptation to be involved in as you go on. Especially if you look at verse 11, and really the context it sets up is, it sets it up, really bad things. If they, these people that are lying in wait to shed blood, don't say no, don't do that. Well, that would make sense to us, right? I don't know that we're going to be tempted for that. But that's not all we're talking about here, right? We're talking about any type of sin, and some of those obviously are much more attractive to us.
To be enticed, but you don't always bad.
No, we can be enticed by good things. And when we talk about friendships, our friendships can take us down the wrong road, but they also can be so much benefit and so much help to go down the right road, right? Okay. All right, Proverbs chapter 3. Proverbs chapter 3, verses 31 and 32. Solomon says, do not envy the oppressor, and choose none of his ways. For the perverse person is an abomination to the Lord, but his secret counsel is with the upright. We looked at verse 32, I think it was last week, in the lesson about abominations to the Lord. But verse 31 talks about envy. What does envy mean? Jealousy. Take it up a notch. Jealousy is, so you've got this, I don't like it. Okay, what's envy? I don't just not like that you have it, but I want it and take it myself. Okay, envious. I want what you have. Okay? Do not envy the oppressor. What are we talking about?
American Standard Version says the man of violence.
Man of violence. Can we look at wicked people and be envious? Do we want what they have? Fill in the blank of what it is, whether it's money, popularity, success, whatever it is. We can look at them, they've got it made. And I can look at that and say, I want that. And that might lead me towards choosing to follow their path.
Psalm 73 speaks.
Exactly. And then I understood their end in verse 16, right? Psalm 73. All right, go ahead and let's look at Proverbs 24 and verse 1 so we can get through as much as possible out of the lesson. This makes a very similar point to Proverbs chapter 3. But Proverbs 24 and verse 1 says, do not be envious of evil men, that's the point we just made, nor desire to be with them. For their heart devises violence, and their lips talk of troublemaking. Okay, first of all, don't be envious. We talked about that. But the main point of this lesson is nor desire to be with them. So what's the point? Stay away from them. Okay, don't just say, I'm not going to be envious. I don't want what they have. Okay, it takes it a step farther, right? Don't be envious. I don't want what they have, but also don't even want to be with them. Don't want what they have. Don't want to be with them at all. Okay? The avoiding of evil men, or the avoidance of evil men. And this verse tells a little bit about why. Because of their heart and because of their lips. And they're always talking about getting into trouble. So stay away from those types of people. We often, and the writer of this material obviously pushes it towards, especially with young people, and even set up the book is talking primarily to young people. Perhaps first 9 chapters, I would agree with that for the most part. And we can see the point here, right? Don't hang around people that are always talking about getting into trouble, troublemaking. Avoid and don't even want to. Okay. The first point I want to make, though, here is that association with the sinful is enticing. We can be envious of those who are wicked. Okay? We can want what they have, and we need to make sure that we, one, void ourselves of that line of thinking, and that would lead us then to not surround ourselves with those types of people. Okay, so here's what we're going to do now. Is we're going to look at a variety of proverbs here that first answer those 2 questions. Who are we talking about when we say make no friendships with the wicked? Because the wicked is those words. When you hear the word wicked, what are you thinking of? What pops into your head when you hear the word wicked? Sinful? What specific types of sins? When you hear the word wicked? Trouble? Evil, murder. That's where I was going. We probably think of some of these really, really, really bad things. Right? The wicked. However, a better understanding would be sinful. Anything that's not righteous is wicked. Okay? Wickedness is the opposite of righteousness. So when we look at these proverbs, outside of maybe talking about the violent, really don't address some of those really, really bad things that we think about when we think about the word wicked. They talk about some other things that we will obviously discuss. But we'll talk about who. Who does it mean? And then why? Why should we not make friendships with the wicked? Each one of these proverbs is going to deal with both of those questions. So first, Proverbs chapter 13 and verse 20. If somebody will read that for us.
He who walks with wise men will be wise, but the companion of fools will suffer harm. Okay, so we'll deal with the first part of that verse a little bit later, hopefully, if we have time. But the second half of that verse is what's under consideration now. The companion of fools will be destroyed. Okay, so what's the who? Who should we not make friendships with? Fools. Okay, so what is a fool? Or who is a fool? Unwise, the opposite of wise. That's a good way to describe it.
Usually a person who, let's say, lives their life without regard to any consequences.
Okay, that's definitely foolish and descriptive of foolish. Yeah, we think of, is that Psalm 19? Anyway, in one of the Psalms. 1930. Does not gain wisdom, hates instruction, hates knowledge, all of those types of things. Here, I want to illustrate it. So Proverbs 17, verse 12 is a favorite proverb of mine. And it is related to the mountains. The Smoky Mountains are a pretty neat place to go to. especially this time of year, right? We like going over there. And occasionally we will see bears, right, when you go over there. And Proverbs 17, verse 12 says, let a man meet a bear robbed of her cubs rather than a fool in his folly. In the mountains, have you ever seen where there's cars backed up, there's bears up there, and then what do you see out really close to the bears sometimes? Foolish people, right? Foolish people standing pretty close to the bears. Now, one time I remember seeing a mama bear and 4 cubs in Cades Cove, and it was on up ahead of us where there were cars. And so the mama bear and 4 cubs were coming through the cars, and there were all these people getting out of their cars like it's a zoo. And even in a zoo, you don't get up. There's enclosures, right? There's barricades. It's not smart. It's foolish, right? Now, when you look at Proverbs 17, verse 12, let a man meet a bear robbed of her cubs rather than a fool in his folly. I would rather, here's what the proverb says, I would rather meet a mama bear whose cubs have just been taken away than I would a fool in their folly. What does that tell you? Yeah, it's really dangerous, right? So not only is being a fool is without sense, right? Behaves foolishly. And the association, if we choose to associate with fools, it's dangerous, right? So that's what this first point is in Proverbs 13, verse 20. Very quickly, in Proverbs 14, verse 7, it's going to make pretty much the same point, at least the first part of it. But verse 7 says, go from the presence of a foolish man when you do not perceive in him the lips of knowledge. And I want to, before we go far, I want to read the New American Standard Version. It says, leave the presence of a fool, or you will not discern words of knowledge. I like that connection there. First of all, the who is the fool, right? Don't associate, don't make friendships with fools. But why? Why should we not make friendships with fools? According to verse 7, chapter 14.
One person says you'll gain no knowledge from the speech.
Okay. So what's the point?
You're not going to learn.
You're not going to learn anything. You will not discern words of knowledge. You won't gain knowledge. There's a lot of different purposes of friendship. There's a lot of value in friendship, right? And I know friendships shouldn't be looked at as stuff, all that we gain from other people, not necessarily. We also give, right? But friendship should be a give and take of knowledge and wisdom. And when you associate, when you surround yourselves with fools, guess what you're not getting? You're not getting wisdom. You're not getting knowledge. And also, if you're trying to give wisdom and knowledge, what impact is that going to have on the fool? None. Because that's what being foolish is you reject knowledge. So what this verse tells us is to go from the presence of a foolish man. Don't associate. Don't spend time with a foolish person.
That I'm reminded of the story of the famous man in Texas. I don't know if anybody's read that book.
I haven't.
And it's about a boy that runs the wrong crowd, kills somebody, got sent to prison, he ends up murdering people in prison. And he gets the nickname, the meanest man in Texas, because of the associations. There was a woman that was a member of the church who started writing him and having an influence on him. Eventually he was baptized, started preaching the gospel, and he married this woman that had converted, a complete change.
Wow.
So you see that the influence in both directions on the life of
Right.
the person.
Incredible. When you start talking about influences, and we can, probably all of us, hopefully we can talk about positive influences on our lives. We've also maybe had some negative influences. Which one are you going to let win out, right? All right, turn to Proverbs chapter 22. I think if any of these verses makes this point, this is the one that makes the point probably the strongest, in my opinion, about the value of not making friendships with wicked And specifically, there's a certain type of person, obviously, here. If somebody will read verse 24 and 25 of chapter 22.
Make no friendship with an angry man, with a furious man that shall not go. Lest thou want his ways, and get a snare to thy soul.
Okay, so who? Angry man and described hot-tempered or furious, okay? And I think New American Standard says given to anger. That draws me to some of the elders later, the given to type. Or a hot-tempered man or a furious man. Do not go with them. I think the writer of the material makes a good point. And right? Constantly. So you shouldn't make friendship with an angry man. Now that's one, when we think of the word wicked, anger probably doesn't come up really quickly to that, but it's part of it, right? Now, the reason I like these verses is the consequences, or how the consequences are stated. It's pretty clear. Why should you not make friendship with an angry man? Not go with a furious or hot-tempered man. All right, lest you learn his ways. That makes the whole point of today's lesson. Why should we be concerned about the type of people with whom we associate? Because we are likely to learn their ways. That could be positive, could be negative, right? It goes both ways. That's the point of this lesson is think about the people that you spend time with because you're likely to learn their ways. Now, the proverb goes on in these verses to tell why that's so bad in the negative sense here. And why is it so bad? So it talks about the soul here. There's a question whether that's talking about eternity or not. It certainly has an application to eternity. I think we can make that point. New American Standard Version says will suffer harm. I think if I remember right, is that correct? No, it says find. That was somewhere else. Find a snare for yourself. It doesn't say soul. Find a snare for yourself. But basically the point, whether it would be in this life or the life to come, that if we learn the ways of an angry man and a furious man, if we become like this type of person, then it's going to set a trap for us. It's a trap. And it's a trap that can get us into trouble in this life, and ultimately it's an eternal trap, right? Because it's sin. Think about the practical nature of this. Let's think really, really practical here. Let's say there's somebody that you know at work, very aggressive, very defensive, argumentative, and they get angry. And it shows, and they get angry a lot. And let's say you learn their ways, and you become just like them. Keeping this in the work context, most likely, where's that going to end up? Where's that going to lead? It's not going to lead to a good place. And yes, that's where a lot of those things come, is to HR, right? It's not going to end well. Now, I know sometimes people can get away with things, and I know sometimes the squeakiest wheel gets the oil and all that stuff. But ultimately in life, this is practical truth. It's not going to end well. You set traps for you. What about relationships? If you are angry and hot-tempered and always fly off the handle, how are your relationships going to go? You're setting traps for yourself. And where does it start in this verse? Association. You learn it somewhere, right? Without going into all the psychology and all of that stuff, because I don't know all the psychology and stuff, but don't you think that's why the abuse is repetitive? You learn it somewhere, right? Now, some of that you can't get away from, right? It's associations that aren't your choice. But that's still the same principle, right? The associations that influence lead to behavior, and that behavior can lead you into some really deep problems. Any other thoughts or comments there? All right, turn to Proverbs 23. Let's read verses 19 through verse 21. Hear, my son, and be wise, and guide your heart in the way. Do not mix with wine-bibbers or with gluttonous eaters of meat. For the drunkard and the glutton will come to poverty, and drowsiness will clothe a man with rags. So what's the who in these three verses? Drunkards? Gluttons? One more. Lazy. Drowsiness there in the last part of verse 21. Okay? What do those three things have in common? Oh, well, we'll talk about where it leads. But yeah, you're right. What is it? Excess? Anybody want to answer it a little bit different way? Drunkards, gluttons, lazy. What do they not have? Self-control. Okay? So yes, all of those things are done in excess. Same with the anger. We're not talking about, every once in a while type of thing necessarily. We're talking about things that they can't control what they're doing. They have no self-control. And so get away from those types of people. Okay? One, because we understand the need for self-control. I use these types of phrases all the time. I probably shouldn't. But if there's one thing we could need, if there's one thing that we could get right in our life, if we could get self-control right in our lives, that would solve a whole lot of problems, right? Self-control is one of those core principles that if we can get right, we'll have a whole lot easier time in this life and ultimately eternally, right? So from this lesson, what would be a key to learning self-control? From this lesson alone, what would be a key to learning self-control? And stay away from people who don't have self-control and there you go. Associate with people that have it. Don't associate with people that don't. That would be the easiest or simplest way to learn it, right? Now, there's other things, obviously, related to self-control that we need to learn, but association is important, right? Now, in these verses, what are the consequences? Why should we not associate with the drunkard, glutton, or lazy? Frank mentioned the first of the two, at least, and they're all related. They'll become poor, they'll come to poverty. And then the last one phrases it just a little bit different. Drowsiness will clothe a man with rags. That's saying the same thing, right? So, again, what Solomon is doing here is pointing out the practical value. This isn't even talking about eternal value necessarily. It's just talking about, practically speaking, if you associate with drunkards, gluttons, and lazy people, guess what's you're going to amount to in this life?
Matt, you can't take a rotten apple and put it in a barrel of good
Right.
apples, and that good apples make the rotten one go good.
And what illustration is used to make that same point in the New Testament? Leaven, right? It's made regarding individuals, it's made regarding the church, but it's the same point, right? It's the same point about association.
You're a big disappointment to your parents.
Well, we'll see that here in just a second in one of these verses. Yes, you'll be ashamed to your parents as well here. Okay, let's look at Proverbs chapter 28 and verse 7 very quickly. It's going to mention gluttons here again. Verse 7 says, whoever keeps the law is a discerning son, but a companion of gluttons shames his father. So there's your point there about shame that should come. And making the same point about self-control there. But ultimately, probably the main point that we can make here, the fact that it talks about the parents or the father here is, you could make the point that your actions don't just bring shame upon yourself, but bring shame upon the people around you as well. Okay, look at Proverbs 16 and verse 29. Here's the one that mentions violence. Somebody read verse 29, Proverbs 16, verse 29.
A violent man enticeth his neighbor, and leadeth him into the way that is not good.
Okay, so we've got the enticing here. Again, the tempting piece. We've talked about the violent. That definitely fits into the wicked here. But what's the basic point about why? Why should you not associate with the violent? Really, why should you not associate with any of the types of people that we talked about, with the sinful, with the wicked? Yeah, separate you from God. But ultimately, right here, what it's talking about is it'll lead you in a way that's not good. I like the plainness and simplicity of the Proverbs. You do this, and you're not going to end up in a good place here. Yes, eternally. But again, I think the primary point is the practical, earthly piece of this is it's just not going to lead you to a good place. Right? Okay.
Matt,
Yes.
We all know, I say this, we all know what's right and wrong. The kicker is if it wasn't enticing, it wouldn't be a temptation.
Exactly.
And the longer you stand next to it, well, you get used to it.
Yep.
And then pretty soon you're complacent to it. And then, pretty soon, well, it's not really that bad.
Agree? That's the whole point, right? That is it right there. And so that's why what we're talking about is really important. And let me make the point, if I haven't made it already, this is a really important lesson for our young people, right? About friendships. But it is just as an important lesson for all of us today as it is to our young people. Can we be led astray? Most certainly, right? So we need to be careful of the people with whom we need those positive associations to help us and make our road easier. Right? Another area, right? But you're right. It showed like from the last 50 years, the statistic, and family and friends were up at the top, and coworkers and all that. And then when the 90s and 2000 hit, the online category came in, all the way went up, and I think it was like 60% of the time was the online versus very low percentages of spending time with people.
Another thing, you can even tell when the trick-or-treaters come by. We had a group come by and they were cheerful and friendly and thankful, and I said, that's the kind of people you want to come by.
Yep. All right, let's try to get, yes.
I think a lot of the problem is when you're online, you can make yourself whoever you want to be.
Yeah, there's a whole lot
A
of,
lot of people.
yep. Yeah, it's kind of an alternate reality
Yes.
type of a thing, right? Okay, so the last question in this main piece of this is how? How do we avoid making friendships with the world? How do we avoid the influence of evil associations? So I think this is one of the first points in the lesson material that the author made. But look at Proverbs chapter 2 and verse 12. And this is in the context. There's a whole section here, chapter 2, all by itself. But I'm going to pull out verses 12 and verse 16. Verse 12 says, to deliver you from the way of evil, from the man who speaks perverse things. And just hold that thought for a second. And then verse 16 is to deliver you from the immoral woman, from the seductress who flatters with her words. So whatever is being discussed right now will help us to deliver us from the evil man, and will also help to deliver us from the immoral woman. Okay? So both of those verses say that it will deliver us from the evil man, deliver us from the immoral woman. Now the question is, what is it? If you want to scan really quickly in the context of chapter 2, what are we talking about that will help us to deliver us from the evil man and will deliver us from the immoral woman? Wisdom, which is found where? Verse 5 is probably the key verse. And in wisdom is the context, but where does wisdom come from? Where does it start? The fear of the Lord and the knowledge of God. So the way that the author of the material phrases it is, what is the answer to how we don't make friendships with the world? It's the Word of God. That's it. It's the Word of God. That's the answer to everything, right? And how does the Word of God deliver us from these associations? It warns us. Avoid that danger. Another verse, and this isn't in Proverbs, it was Psalm 119. Heed according to your word. The Word of God is the key. Okay, so we'll save, since we do have another lesson on friendship, we will save this next section for the next class. We'll talk about it a little bit more, about the type of people that we should associate with. We just have a couple minutes. I haven't done this in a couple weeks. Does anybody have a favorite proverb? I've been asking you to think about your favorite proverbs. Does anybody have one that they want to mention?
Verse 3, 5, and 6, trust in the Lord with all your heart, and not on your understanding, in all of his ways acknowledge him, and he will direct your path.
Yep, chapter 3, verses 5 and 6. That should be a mantra for life. That means that core principle of our lives, if we put that into practice in our lives, everything else should fall into place, right? Lean upon God, not ourselves. Anybody else?
16, 18, pride goes before destruction. The Holy Spirit will fall.
It's a certain principle of life, right? The point is about humility. But where's pride going to lead? It leads to a fall. Okay. All right, thank you for your attention and comments. And be noting favorite proverbs, and we'll try to do that at the very end of each class if I don't forget. But thank you for your attention and comments.